Welcome to part 3 of our series on building a Zelda-like game in Phaser 3. In this video, we'll be implementing player input, setting up a system to detect keyboard presses and control our character. If you're new here, this is part of a full series where we create a Zelda-inspired game from scratch. Check out the playlist link in the description to start from the beginning. Let's dive in and start coding. Next, for our player, we're going to focus on our player input. For our player input, we're going to rely on our keyboard plugin from Phaser. Our keyboard plugin is a wrapper around the native DOM keyboard events. And by relying on this plugin, we can easily do things like add event listeners for when a key is being pressed, when it's being lifted up, or when a key is being pressed down, we can check the state of it. By relying on this built-in plugin, we can easily bootstrap our player input controller and have our player moving around our scene. But before we get into our code, we want to make sure we set up our input controller in a way where it's going to be reusable across our project. So for our game, not only do we want to move our player around our scene, we'll want to be able to do things like support input when we have a menu visible to the player, if the player's in their inventory, and we'll need to listen for our keyboard input and move our cursor around our game. But we'll also want to do this in a way where our input is generic enough we can use it for other game objects. As an example, for our player, we need to have input, and this will be the form of our keyboard. For our enemy game objects in our scene, we need to have a way to have those enemies move around our scene, and so there is a type of input there, but it won't be controlled by the keyboard. Instead, this will be a very basic AI, where our enemy would have some type of state machine where they're going to move around and make different decisions. Maybe this is them chasing the player, maybe it's a random pattern, or maybe it's a boss where they have a set pattern that they follow. So for our input, to make this generic enough where it's reusable, we're going to rely on the component design pattern. The component design pattern allows us to create reusable code, and then that way we can extend the behavior of our game objects by using composition over inheritance. We'll be using this pattern for all of the components we build for our game. That way they're reusable for both our player and our enemies and other game objects. To make our input component reusable across our various game objects, we're going to create a base class for our input component, which is just going to have our base properties that we're going to expect for our types of input. This would include things for like if the player or AI wants to move up, down, left or right, if they're trying to attack, and different things like that. By creating this base class, we'll be able to reuse that from our game objects, but then we can create different implementation types. As an example, we can create a keyboard component that would extend this input component, and now this would have our logic for our Phaser keyboard plugin layered on top of our base functionality. By doing it this way, we could then in the future add in support for things like gamepads and different things like that. To start adding in our code, let's go into our source folder. Let's make a new folder. We're going to call this components. Let's add in another folder. We're going to call this input, and we'll start off with our input component. So we'll make a new file. We'll call this input component.ts. Let's export out our class. So we'll do export class input component. So now on our input component, let's add in our properties that we'll need for our class. This is going to be the directions that our game object would want to move to. So they're going to provide input to move in that direction. And it could be things for if that game object is trying to attack, if they're trying to do some type of action, and different things like that. So for these, we'll just do up, down, left, and right. And we're going to have our types be Booleans to show that if that type of input is being set right now. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it a few times. So we'll have up, we'll have down, let's have left, we'll have right. And now let's do our action, and we'll call it action key. Let's do attack key. And we'll have one more. We're going to call this select key. And so this would be like if the player presses the enter key or the select key from the SNES, where we'd want to show our pause menu or possibly open our inventory depending on our keys. Now that we have our properties, let's add in our constructor. We'll add in our default values. So we'll have this dot up, and we'll have all of our keys be in the state of false, so we have no input at this time. I'm going to copy this, we'll paste that, and we'll update the property names. So we'll have down, left, right, action. We'll have our attack, and we'll have our select key. Now that we have our properties, we need a way to expose these to our game objects that'll have our instance of our component. So we'll add in some getters and setters for each of these values. So we're going to have get, and we'll do is up, down, and we'll have it return our Boolean value, and this is going to return this and our up key. And we'll need to be able to set these if we have input being provided. So we're going to do set, and we'll do is up, down, We'll have our value. This will be a Boolean. We'll do this dot up is going to be equal to our value. Now we just need to repeat this pattern for our other properties. I'm just going to copy and paste. And so we'll have is down, down. And we'll have is left down. Oh, let's update our values. So we'll have this dot down, this dot left. Then we'll have is right down. And so now we need to do our other keys. So let's copy this. We'll do is action key just down. So now for our action keys, we updated our naming convention because we want to do a different type of input handling here versus our directions. For our player, we want our player to be able to hold one of our direction buttons and have our player keep moving in that direction. But for all of our other keys, we want to check to see if the key was just pressed down. And so we only want to do the action one time and wait until our key is lifted and then they press that button again before we do our action. So we'll want to copy this pattern for our two other keys. So I'm just going to paste this twice. Next, we'll have is attack key just down. And so we'll have our attack key. And now we'll have is select key just down. Finally, on our input component, we're just going to add in one public method that's going to allow us to reset the state of our input. So we're going to do public. We're going to call this reset. We'll have it return nothing. And now we just want to reinitialize our values back to false. So we're going to copy this here. We'll come down to reset and we'll go ahead and save. Now to layer in our phaser keyboard plugin, let's make a new class. So under our components input, we'll do a new file. We're going to call this keyboard component. Let's do export. We'll do our class. We're going to do keyboard component. We're going to extend our input component class. Let's add in our constructor. And let's go ahead and call super so we can invoke the constructor on our parent class. Now for our keyboard component, we're going to need an instance of our keyboard plugin. That way we can reference it in our component here. So in our constructor, we'll add in one argument. We're going to call this keyboard plugin. For our type, this is going to be a phaser input. We'll have keyboard and we'll have keyboard plugin. Now that we have our keyboard plugin, we can tell phaser which keys we want to keep track of our state for and which keys we want to listen for events on. To do this, we're going to reference our keyboard plugin and we'll start off by doing create cursor keys. What create cursor keys does, this will return an object with some of the common keys that we would listen for input on in our games. This includes like our arrow keys, or up, down, left, and right, as well as our space bar and shift key. You can listen for those input on those keys directly, but create cursor keys just is a shortcut to automatically get those bindings. Otherwise, we need to do keyboard plugin and we need to add a key that we want to listen for input on. And so we can do phaser, our input, our keyboard. We'll do our key codes. And so like we can listen for our left this way, but by doing create cursor keys, it's going to automatically do all four for us. Besides our arrow keys, we'll also want to listen for input on specific keys of our keyboard. And so this will be tied to our action, our attack, and our select. And so we'll need to provide which key bindings we want to use. So for our attack key, we're going to listen for Z. And I'm just going to copy this line of code here. We'll paste it a few more times. And so for our action key, we're going to do X. And then for our select key, we'll rely on shift. So we won't need this line of code here. And there's one other key we'll want to listen for. And we'll want to listen for our enter key. So for our enter key, this would be for when we want to open up our menu in our game. So we need to add that key actually to our input component. So let's jump back over here. Let's add an enter key just so we have it in our base class. And I'm just going to copy this. We'll come down here. And let's add in our getter and setter. And so we'll do enter key. And so we'll do is enter key just down. So now in our keyboard component class, now that we have our bindings, we need to associate those with our properties from our input component. To do that, we need to store a reference to these keys on our class. So let's add some new properties to our class. For our first property, we do cursor keys. For our type, it'll be phaser, types, input, keyboard, and then cursor keys. Now let's do our other keys. We'll have attack key. This will be our phaser, our input, our keyboard, and then key. I'm going to copy this line of code here, and we'll want to paste it for our other ones as well. And so we'll have our action key, and then we'll have our enter key. So now down here, we'll assign those to our properties. We'll have this, our cursor keys. It's going to be equal to our keyboard plugin. Next, we'll have our attack key. then we'll have our action key, and then we'll have our enter key. So now to use our keyboard keys to check for input, what we can do is we can do things like this, .cursor keys, then we can reference our keys, so we can do like down, and then we can do is down, and this is going to return a true or false value if that key's being pressed. For our keyboard plugin, we're going to want to return this value for when we want to check like when our is down key is being pressed. To do that, we're going to override our getters from our base class with these values. So I'm going to copy all of the getters and setters here from our base class. We'll come over to our keyboard component. Let's paste those in, and we'll go ahead and get rid of our setters since we won't need those to be overridden. And now we can just update our references. So when we do get is up down, let's just copy this code here. We're going to paste it. And so we'll do cursor keys, we'll do up, and we'll do is down. Now let's copy that, and we'll do the same thing for our other keys. So we'll do down is down, we'll do left is down, and we'll do is right down. Now, to check to see if a key was just pressed down, we'll use a utility method from Phaser. So we're going to do return phaser input keyboard, we'll do just down, and now we provide our key. We want to check to see if it was just pressed down or not. And so we'll do for our action key, we'll do this, and we'll do our action key. Let's copy this, and we'll do the same thing for these ones down here. Now for our attack key, we'll do this .attack key. For our select key, we'll do this, we'll do our cursor keys, and then shift. Now for our enter key, we'll reference our enter key. Finally, for our input component, we're going to add two more getters, and this is going to be for our up and down keys. So currently we have our two getters for when our key's being pressed and held down. We'll want to add in two methods to see if it was just now pressed down. And so when our player's moving around our scene, we want the player to be able to hold our arrow key and keep moving. But then when we're navigating things like our menu, we might want a different type of input where a single key press is what we're looking for. So over in our input component class, let's come up to where we have our get is up down. So let's copy our code for our getter for is up down. We'll paste it down here. We're going to do is up just down. We'll return our default value of this .up, and we'll do the same thing for our getter for is down down. So is down just down. So now we're going to copy these two getters over to our keyboard component class. We'll paste those in. All right, and I'm just going to move these up by our other methods. So we'll come up to here where we have up and down. We'll paste those in. And now we just need to update our references. And so let's copy our code down here where we do just down, paste that here. And now we just need to change this .attack key. We'll do our cursor keys up, and then we'll do our cursor keys, and now we'll do down. And that's safe. That's it for this part of the series. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you're following along, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions or want to share your progress, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.